I have called you here this morning because I think it is important that as head of the government and as chairman of the National Security Council, I have a duty in those capacities to respond to yesterday's development. I have with me this morning the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Defense Staff, and the Minister of National Security. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the national community, there are certain statements of irrefutable facts which ought to be a part of the conversation and the acceptance of the people of Trinidad and Tobago at this time. And let me reiterate a few of them. One is that our country is going through very difficult times. Statement of fact. Secondly, these difficulties are affecting some persons more than others. Thirdly, we do acknowledge that some persons have been patient as we are going through these difficulties. But the most important fact I want to restate here today is that our society can only hold together as a society confronting these difficulties if we continue to subscribe to the orderly progress of the rule of law impacting on each and every citizen equally and fairly. No person in Trinidad and Tobago, regardless of your station, regardless of where you live, regardless of your circumstances, could be expected to put him or herself above the rule of law because of the nature of your circumstances. For quite some time, citizens in various locations in our national community have been expressing their frustrations, and I may say sometimes expressing their control over certain communities by making their conditions known to the rest of the national community and the authorities, by taking actions which would in themselves guarantee that the rest of the national community will take notice, and invariably those actions may result in a breach of the law and sometimes a breach of the peace. The national community, and I dare say, acting through the state's agencies, police, fire, defense force, have been really very frequently tolerant of these kinds of breaches of the law, expressing an understanding of frustrations in communities and by individuals. These situations have now become a normal way of persons expressing themselves in their communities, whether it is the burning of tires, cutting down of trees, and so on. But yesterday, we came to a point where we have to draw the line. And the line is being drawn here as such. Every citizen is subject to the monitoring and the intervention of the authorized agents of state who, for reasons known to them or suspicions held by them, and therefore call your conduct into question. Yesterday, in the Port of Spain area, the police, who are the authorized agents of monitoring and responding to conduct of individuals, had reason to go into two communities and to extract from those communities under law persons whom the police wanted to question, to talk to. This aspect of law enforcement applies to every single citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, whether you are Prime Minister, you are Commissioner, you are garbage collector, or university lecturer. If the police determines that a citizen is to be questioned, to be detained, to be taken in for question, the rule of law and the maintenance of law and order dictates that such person, him or her, subject him or herself to the dictates of the authorities. As the police went in yesterday to extract two persons from communities, the reaction of the community was to seek to obstruct the police in carrying out these lawful actions. I want to make it abundantly clear to all citizens, regardless of where you live, and I'm speaking here for past governments, present and future governments, and that is that the society of Trinidad and Tobago will not survive if persons take it upon themselves that they will choose who will subject themselves to the law and when they subject themselves to the law and who will be above the law. The conduct that was described yesterday and that had the effect of shutting down the national capital, terrorizing those who were caught in the absence of free movement, a condition that is guaranteed under the Constitution, and the trauma that the national community experienced yesterday will not and must not be encouraged or tolerated by the national community. Regardless of the circumstances that may prevail in communities, there is no excuse for the lawlessness that we saw yesterday. And what is worse, parents who have children, young people who grow up in communities, if what we saw yesterday is the way we will deal with our situation, then it means that we are advocating anarchy as a way of life in Trinidad and Tobago. And what that means is that there will be no way out of whatever difficult circumstances we find ourselves in now. Because children seeing their parents behaving in this way would be quite reasonably expected to think that this is how they ought to behave as they grow up. And all that would mean is a multiplication of whatever problems we seek to address at this point in time. With respect to these kinds of developments, insofar as there are demands upon the state to make more resources available to individuals and communities, this kind of development only guarantees that less resources will be available for such purposes. Because as we would have noticed in recent years, because we have had to spend more of our limited resources on national security to respond to the chronic ongoing criminal conduct, national security allocation is now second only to education in this country, and in fact on instances may exceed this expenditure on education. That should be a cause for alarm in this country. And when one looks at how it is done, insofar as we are duty-bound to direct more resources to ensure that there is law and order and to provide the national community with safety and security, as we continue to do that, the resources expended on this exercise, one can only ask, suppose we were more peaceful, had less criminal conduct, and we were spending $1 billion less on national security, or even $2 billion less to get that peace and security, what more, what could we have done with that $2 billion or that $1 billion in focusing that expenditure on the specific needs of those persons who make the greatest demand on the state for that kind of assistance? But if the criminality and the disorderly behavior and the disrespect of law and order continues, it can only make greater demands on the state, meaning resources that now are directed to health and education and infrastructure will have to go to national security, and that is a self-defeating purpose. So the very conduct that is being justified on the basis of not enough national resources can in itself have the effect of reducing the amount of resources that can become available to communities and persons who look to the state for relief. Ladies and gentlemen, as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I want to give the national community, not just Nikki Crosby, but the national community the assurance that the government's support for law enforcement is unwavering, and that the Commissioner of Police, the Chief of Defense Staff, and all national security agencies have the full support of the state to enforce the law in Trinidad and Tobago, regardless of who you are, where you are, and what your station is in this country. Because without that, what we will be accepting is anarchy. And persons who are calling on others to break the law, to incite violence, and who justify it on whatever way, will find no sympathy from the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The oath of office that we have taken to hold the office that we hold has written in that oath to enforce and observe the law and the Constitution without fear or favor without malice or ill will. And that is the oath of office holders in the parliament who hold offices as managers of this situation. And that oath was not written in a very capricious way. It was for good reason why the oath of office of members of the cabinet, of members of parliament, are required to state publicly in the parliament, on assuming duty, that we will observe the law without fear or favor, without malice or ill will. If we begin to pick and choose how the law is enforced in this country because of malice, because of fear, that will be the end of the vision of 1962. We are not prepared to countenance, to tolerate, or to encourage any no-go area in Trinidad and Tobago. Every street, every highway in Trinidad and Tobago must be available for the free and safe passage of all citizens. And insofar as we are required to improve the ability of the police to guarantee that commitment, I give you the assurance that the government will ensure that that is done. And of course, I want to point out to the national community that we are not inventing any wheels here. We have seen, we've had experience in the Caribbean where persons have taken it upon themselves to become the government of the street in certain communities, to seek to control government largesse to those communities, to deprive those to whom that largesse is earmarked by the parliament, and to determine what goes on in there and who gets what, and to determine that they have the ability to enforce law and order in such communities. The only authority in Trinidad and Tobago that is authorized to enforce law and order are the duly appointed and gazetted officers of state who wear the necessary uniform and who, under the authority of the country's constitution, are authorized to carry out law enforcement in this country. And the government will not shy away from and will not shirk its responsibility to ensure that a handful of people, especially those who choose crime as a way of life, will dictate what goes on in this country. I want to guarantee to this country the government's effort to ensure that those who need help from the state, insofar as that help is available and affordable, that help will be directed to them. Those who seek to break the law on behalf of those who have not broken the law, on behalf of preserving a future for this country and a quality of life that we all anticipate and deserve and must have under our arrangements of law enforcement and our guarantees under our constitution, that the law enforcement agencies will and must be allowed to carry out their duties. The law is so constructed that if persons have to be questioned, then evidence has to be adduced before such persons can be prosecuted, and there must be a proper basis for law enforcement to act. I am not here in any way advocating that law enforcement would act in an inhumane or injudicious manner. They are acting under the provisions of the law, and it is the Commissioner of Police's duty to ensure that his charges, men and women, act in the provision of the law. What happened yesterday could easily have turned out quite nasty, because if the officers, 1, 2, 3, or how many of them, had reacted differently, these are people who are armed with dangerous weapons, with authority of state to use those weapons in defense of their person and in defense of other citizens. And this situation could easily have escalated to one where law enforcement officers could have resorted to that situation, and God alone knows what might have happened there. And that is why today the government is drawing the line on tolerating this kind of misconduct. I want to draw your attention to the fact that what happened on St. Paul Street at that housing development is no development of yesterday. When I was in the opposition, I had an experience of an old man coming to me and telling me that he had built his house 50 years ago, and he was living alone. His family had migrated or died off or whatever. He was living alone in this house that he built. 2 young men just walked into his house and told him to move into the back room of the house. And this aged and infirm gentleman, under the order of these hale and hearty young men, had to move into the back room of his house, and he was living at that there when he spoke to me. The young men took over his house, occupied his house, and continued to benefit from his life's effort. He went to his member of parliament, who apparently was powerless to act. He went to the police, who was either unable or unwilling to act. And then he came to me, where I was away from this problem. When that matter came to me, it was one of the issues I raised with the then government, that this whole question of home invasion ought to find itself focused on, so that persons who choose to do things like that must face an extra penalty on behalf of those who are law-abiding. Subsequent to that, a situation developed on, I think it was Nelson Street, where persons were chased out of their home, and I think one family was burnt out. I, as a opposition leader, I walked in that area, saw it for myself, and the government of the day reacted by putting in that area a police post. That and those developments did not put an end to that problem. What the police sought to do yesterday was to move persons who took it upon themselves to terrorize some people, frighten them out of their lawful residence, and occupy it by fear and force. When the police intervened to do the reasonable thing, which is to remove such persons so that the law-abiding citizens could occupy their lawful residence, it was to my shock and great disappointment that adults in that community who should know better and who should want better for themselves stood in the way of the police, broke a number of laws in defense of other citizens who had behaved in that inhumane way to persons who had lost their residence in the face of criminal conduct. The persons who had been put out were not put out yesterday or last week. They have been living this horror for quite some time until the police intervene. It is only the police that can intervene in situations like that. It is only the police that is authorized to respond to those situations. So what is being said to us? That since the police cannot or will not be allowed to intervene, that this development must be accepted as a way of life. And those who are muscular, those who are, however, having confidence to carry out these acts, will then do so with impunity. Well, today I am saying to those persons who have those thoughts and who've carried out those actions, perish those thoughts. I am hereby instructing the Commissioner of Police publicly to use all and any resource available to him, authorized under the law of Trinidad and Tobago, to seek out all such persons who have evicted persons from their homes unlawfully and ensure that lawful occupancy prevails on all circumstances. The Commissioner of Police is trained, he's experienced, and he will know how to go about with that duty. I'm hereby publicly instructing the Minister of National Security, who is the officer with the instruction, to instruct the Defense Force to provide all lawful support to all aspects of law enforcement to ensure that no citizen stands in the way of the police in carrying out their duty. And I'm hereby letting the citizenry know that this is the time when all good men, all good women will stand and should stand on the line of law enforcement, and let all those who have criminal intent in this country know that they stand alone where these matters are concerned. They are citizens of this country. They are entitled to what the country has to offer, but they are not entitled to have their own rules and to make the country a hell for the rest of us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going through difficult times. I think most of us know that. But these times are not to be made to last forever. But during these times, we are called upon, now more than ever, to behave differently so that what little resources we have will be made to be put to use for the betterment of the condition, particularly of those who are least able to help themselves. There are many people who are living in fear of the criminal element in many communities in this country. The government is reacting to it in a reasonable way. But the criminal element is now saying to the government, we will determine what happens and how it happens. The government, no government, can accept or tolerate that. To do so is to succumb to a call of anarchy. And this government will not react in that way. We will be lawful, we will be responsible, as we are in the office that we hold, And we have enough resources to ensure that what has happened yesterday does not become a daily feature in Trinidad and Tobago. We require the support of the public. Sympathy is one thing, encouragement is another. We can all be sympathetic to the circumstances of certain persons in our national community, but we may not serve any useful purpose by encouraging wrongdoing on the part of anyone. Whether you are a minister of government who stole public money, whether you are a well-heeled person who's getting more than your fair share, or whether you are a criminal in the neighborhood seeking to organize no-go areas and to dictate whether the police acts or not. The government is the agency under the Constitution that has a responsibility to protect the citizenry. We are a small island nation, 1.3 million people. It is not feasible to put a policeman in every household and on every street at all times. It is not feasible or affordable to put a police post in every community because a handful of people are misbehaving. What is feasible is for us as citizens to take a decision not to encourage wrongdoing in our household, in our streets, in our communities, or in our country, and to ensure that the resources allocated to law enforcement, law and order, peace and security, that those resources that we have available to us, that we can afford, are sufficient to maintain peace and order in this country. To do otherwise is to say to the country, take the resources from the medicine in the hospital, take the resources from teachers in the schools, take the resources from the maintenance of roadways, take the resources from investment in an economic infrastructure, and spend it on fighting a criminal element. I want to say to those who seem to be misunderstanding the rules under which we live in this country. I saw a gentleman on the television, a young, fit-looking gentleman, saying to the community that the occupancy of the houses in Clifton Heights is that there were empty apartments and persons occupied them because they could not find other places to go, and they properly occupied them because they were empty. I want to say to that young gentleman and others who are thinking that way, you are wrong, and that kind of action cannot be tolerated. Because an apartment may look or is empty, gives you no right or no authority and no protection of the state to enter it without legal authority. Persons who have property are entitled to close their property and go on vacation, go away. It does not give you any right to claim access. Access being claimed in that way is a breach of the law. It's called trespass, and you can be arrested, you can be prosecuted for doing that. And if you have found that as your place of abode, in that way, rest assured that you've broken the law, and the police will put you out of the apartment that you are occupying, which does not belong to you, and in most instances belong to some person who would have sacrificed monthly to be able to pay the rent or to have paid the mortgage. And a family that is under law occupying it cannot be displaced because somebody sees the apartment as empty. And those who encourage that, I'll say one thing to you. As Emperor Haile Selassie said, in the appropriate occasion, today is my day, your day will come. As you encourage wrongdoing of this nature, where you know that persons have suffered that kind of injustice at the hands of persons who have interpreted their existence in that way, if that becomes the way of life in the community, it's only a matter of time before they put you out of your apartment. And if the police is unable to intervene to restore order and lawful occupancy, your day will come. We are not going down this road any further. We ask for respect, we ask for patience, we ask for tolerance, and we ask for good citizenship. And we do have persons whose job it is to ensure that there's peace, order, and I dare say, goodwill in Trinidad and Tobago. Any questions? Yes, Joel.
Prime Minister, first and foremost, any plan, or was any plan discussed this morning with your heads of state security about any permanent police or military presence on the Beetham Highway?
No, I came straight here. I've simply summoned these officers here to hear what I have to say to you, And I know that conversations are taking place. About a few days ago, we had a meeting of the National Security Council where matters of this nature were discussed. We discussed the situation in the prison, and we are very well seized of the circumstance, and I can assure you that we will do what has to be done. I simply mentioned a moment ago, I heard this morning one former national security minister saying that the government should put a police post in the Beetham and one in Sealats and one in so and so. That may sound good, but that cannot be the overriding solution. Where there is need and where we can afford to do it, but we cannot take the position that we will put a police post on every street corner. What I am talking about is law enforcement across the board, from St. Clair to Cedros, from Enterprise to Beetham, because that is how it has to be.
Just two quick follow-ups. One, do you, apart from this address, do you plan to visit meet with any of those residents there to hear directly any concerns that they have as we seek to deal with issues?
I am the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I am prepared in appropriate conditions to speak to any and all citizens, and I'm prepared to travel across Trinidad and Tobago in every single location as circumstances warrant or as time is available. I am open and available. But I must say, it is not my job to enforce law. There's law enforcement. Law enforcement can only be done under particular authorized officers. And where there are circumstances for authorized law enforcement, it is only the authorized law enforcement can intervene. My intervention would be different, probably by time and by nature. But where there is law enforcement required in situations, in events, and with respect to the conduct of persons, only the authorized officers of state can do that. And that is why it is so troublesome when they seek to do that and the citizenry react in the way it happened yesterday. So I hope we see less tire burning. I hope we see less road blocking. I hope we see no more garbage being thrown on the street, because these are having the effect of traumatizing the nation, destroying our psyche and our confidence in ourselves. There are other avenues. There are many other avenues to treat with whatever problems we have. And these developments only make it more difficult.
Yes, the other thing, since the incident occurred yesterday, I've seen some people online reporting there had been a past plan, a previous PNW administration on a wall, I think they put a broom or something like that. Is that something that is even consideration?
And if you build a wall by Beetham, how does that affect the behavior in St. Paul Street and in Laventil and Diego Martin? These are, whatever has to be done, which could be done, we will do. But there's no single effect. There's no single action. Today I am talking simply about law enforcement where law enforcement is required. There are a number of solutions, and as situations develop, we will have to respond to them. If it was different, we will respond differently. We are going to have to ensure that we maintain law enforcement, law and order is effective in Trinidad and Tobago, and citizens accept that we can only be a society that can develop. Because you know, it is said, in situations like this, if we don't have the benefits of law and order, lives will become short and brutish. And those are not original phrases of mine.
Given the fact that, I know you said that it's not feasible to put a police post in every community.
In every community.
But given the location of the Beetham community, and the fact that because of the location and the fact that it's on a major artery in and out of the city, do you think, and I'm asking the question in view of the fact that we have seen online previously videos of Beetham people preventing the police from going in and execute searches and so on. Do you think that this is one community that is crying out for permanent police posts because of the capacity to disrupt?
So take the answer to that question in what I've said before and the commitment that I've given, that the government will ensure that our major arteries and our roadways and byways are safe for the free passage of all our citizens. We will do what has to be done to carry out that commitment.
You thought about home invasion, but I think the issue is bigger than home invasion. The issue is organized gang activity. And do we have the necessary attention and focus to gang activity at this point in time in the police service? I know that a previous PNM government, under Martin Joseph, had set up systems and had made gang activity a major focus of its attention. Do we have that at present? Because I get the impression that we're not making a dent on gang activity at all.
Well, let's put it this way. I would not want to present a community as a gang. What we saw yesterday in 2 locations in the Port of Spain area was not gang activity. It was a community activity where persons, children, women, men came out as a community. But let me say this, only recently, in response to that kind of question you asked, which is the need to focus on gang activity, it was made public that we had reorganized the security services to create the Organized Crime and Intelligence Unit and to initiate them into focusing on that area of organized gang activity. So we are doing that. There is a response to that, and there is an arm of state security effort towards that. But yesterday went beyond that. Whether there are gangs in those communities, I'm not going to address on this forum at this moment. But I'm saying to you, communities, whole communities are taking the position that the police is unwelcome in there. And of course, if the police seek to carry out their day-to-day duties with respect to treating with certain individuals in the community, that others rise up in defense of those individuals. That's a different story.
No, but you understand that it's in protection of the alleged gang leaders.
I understand it very well. I'm head of the National Security Council. Right. I understand it very well.
So it's all gang related?
It may very well be so, but worse, it may go beyond the gang. It may go beyond persons who are not in the gang, but are prepared to take action. I heard yesterday on social media exhortations to persons to come out and commit certain kinds of crimes in the city of Port of Spain. Every person who would have heard that may not be a gang member, but some person may respond to it. So this kind of behavior goes beyond the gang, if a gang exists in the community. And I want to say to those persons who are being affected or who are parts of what might be called gangs, whatever your circumstance, this kind of response and taking this as the way out only worsens not only your circumstance, but the circumstance of your children. Because if this is how we are going to treat with situations, and if this is how we are going to make a living in this country, then we hold out no hope for improvement in the next generation, because our children are being told that this is how it is going to be with our lives. And that is why we have to say no to the gang culture, or we have to say no to the community support for wrongdoing culture.
What consequences are going to come to the people who took part in yesterday's action? Do we have CCTV cameras that can tell us who was pelting stones, who was pelting old things, who was pelting...
I would like the Commissioner of Police to respond to that question, please.
Just to indicate, we have in fact captured the events. We are at this point in time analyzing those footage with the clear intention of prosecuting persons who we identify as committing offenses on yesterday's date. So I have directed a team to focus on prosecuting individuals coming out of yesterday's event.
And I take it to mean that that approach will not only apply to yesterday's events, it will apply to events of similar nature in the future, and not only at Beetham, but everywhere else.